Hey everybody, and today we're here to talk about Path of Exile 2 and the Warrior. So after that potentially maybe a bit too long introduction, here we are. Now I wanted to show that introduction because people have been calling my build kind of memey, janky, stupid, etc. And I don't really think, I don't think this is literally the best Warrior build, but I think its clear speed is fine. I think its abilities are fine. I think its damage is fine. I think everything it's doing is fine. I would call this a good build. Maybe not literally the best, but I would certainly call this a good build. And as I continued to play it, I kind of made it up as I was going along. A lot of people started to ask me, how do I do this build? Can I do this build? Because a lot of people, they look at Warrior, right? And they think, I want to play this character in melee. And a lot of other videos on Warrior aren't really putting him in melee. They're putting him as far away as they can get from enemies and trying to stay as far away from they can. They're trying to not interact with anyone possible. They're not trying to like dodge attacks or anything. They're just trying to AoE everyone as far away as they can, never touch them. And that's not really what I was trying to do, and that's not really what I've been wanting to do. So obviously I haven't really made this video because my character is very tanky. I have very good gear. I have all 8 ascension points, and so people that aren't at least reasonably tanky probably aren't going to be able to pull this build off. And I haven't really wanted to make a video because I don't want to make a video that's kind of short, just like, you know, 5 to 10 minutes of me just rambling on about, yo, I went this support, I went this support. Like, I want to explain everything so you guys can understand what it is I'm doing, why I'm dodge rolling so much, things like that, so that you guys can go ahead and you can go play Warrior. And then after playing Warrior, that you can go and adjust my build, because it's obviously not perfect. I didn't play Path of Exile 1. I mean, I did, and I actually was original backer, but I never really got that much into it. So I don't know any of these new things like breaches or delirium. I don't know what any of this is, and there's no tutorial, so I kind of have to like make this up as I go along, which could be a little bit frustrating trying to learn when there's no actual tutorial for anything. So obviously, and I think most people know this, this isn't me showing it, I'm just trying to show this right now. I'll show the whole thing later in more detail. Giant's Blood and then using a two-handed weapon with a shield is basically the meta right now for Warriors. That's basically the #1 thing that Warriors can do to get an advantage on other classes, and particularly with Titans, that's basically their bread and butter. So the most important thing you should do before you even contemplate, I mean, this build probably works with a one-hander, it just won't be as strong, but it will definitely still work with a one-hander because Magma Shield scales off your shield. So the most important things I would say that you need to do before you even contemplate starting to do this build is, I would say, get Hulking Form and get Mysterious Lineage. These two I got way later, but at the very least, Hulking Form is like 100% needed. Mysterious Lineage, I would say, you don't absolutely need it before you start doing this, but it certainly does help. Now, of course, I did do a video a little bit back, I think a couple days ago, going over this build, but I'm going to go over it again in more detail, in better detail. Why? Because they recently did a patch and I fine-tuned this build a lot better, and I think showing it with that introduction video gets across a lot more clear what it is that we are trying to achieve here. What is it then that we are trying to achieve here? Basically, this build relies heavily on Magma Barrier, because Magma Barrier is a very powerful effect that a lot of people are not really focusing on. Magma Barrier is probably the biggest advantage that you can have for actually going into melee and interacting with other people. So before we get into this build, what is probably going to be your start up? Before we even go into anything, what's going to be your setup? What are you going to try to do? So #1, you're going to want Magma Barrier. What do I have on Magma Barrier? The thing with my Magma Barrier right now is it doesn't really matter. We've just got Elemental Focus, Magnified Effect, and Fire Infusion. It's a big AoE, it does damage. It's not really that important. At the end of the day, so long as you have Magnified Effect on it, it'll probably be fine. One thing you'll probably notice as you go through the late game is that enemy HP doesn't really scale, which probably should be looked at. I think like level 80, enemies should practically have twice the amount of health they do, but I digress. Basically, Magma Barrier works really well the longer you go on, because at the end of the day, it does a decent chunk of damage. Even with my current build, we're looking at it's doing 19,346 damage, and Mace Swing is dealing 16,000 damage, so it's doing more damage with my left click. Now, why is that? That's because I went ahead, and this is going to be very, very, very important before you attempt this. You need to get a shield that has a lot of armor. The block chance is nice too, for sure, and the additional physical damage reduction is good, sure. You can get some other effects on it, like increased maximum resistances, things like that. For the most part, you're going to want armor. Before you do anything, you want armor, you want maxed out resistances, you want maxed out chaos resistance. Now, a lot of chaos effects have been nerfed. You can't actually survive them. That was definitely a very good change from GGG, Grinding Gear Games. Chaos effects were basically shutting down warriors because they would just utterly one-shot anyone, and so warriors who have these long cast times and need to stay immobile a lot, any random chaos effect that hit you would just full health you and end your map. And now, definitely if you have chaos resisted 75, you can survive. So what I would go do, before you start trying to do anything, what you gotta do, you gotta get a shield. Even if you're using a one-handed weapon, you need a shield, get lots of armor on it, make sure you buy some gear. For one exalted, you can get some resistances, things like that, try to get chaos resist, get a lot of strength. This is generally what you're gonna try to be going for, okay? Now, if you can't do that, you'll be fine earlier in the maps. They definitely have made it a lot easier on the players. I'm hoping they add some difficulty back later in the game, but at least starting maps, I did say that it was basically impossible for warriors to start maps without some good luck on drops because they were gonna die repeatedly. But okay, so what is the build doing? Why do I dodge roll so much? What are we doing here? Okay, so originally I was doing Magma Barrier to set up a Bone Shatter, but at this point, I realized that Magma Barrier actually scales really, really good. As compared to the other shield abilities, let me explain here for a second. Resonating Shield sucks. It doesn't really do any damage. I'll explain why we're using it later, but you can see right here it's doing 62% attack damage. They recently increased the amount of physical damage you get per armor on your shield. That's useless. It's totally worthless. It adds an utterly insignificant amount of damage. I mean, such minuscule, I truly believe the developers never actually, logged in the game as a warrior and actually checked how much damage that was adding to their ability. We're talking in a complete endgame build, it added 300 DPS to Resonating Strike. In a build where some of my abilities are doing 20,000 or 59,000 DPS, it added 300 DPS to Resonating Strike. I was really expecting a bigger buff, but there we go. So that's not the important part. The important part of Magma Barrier, in fact, is that when you look at it, it has 455% damage scaling, which is definitely the better part. And it does fire damage. Fire damage seems to be better than physical damage, and that's quite good. When we look at other abilities like Shield Charge here, Shield Charge has pretty good damage scaling, but it seems to do a lot of physical. It seems to have much less base damage as well, and it just does way less damage. Shield Charge. Magma Barrier hits like a truck. So why is Magma Barrier doing so good? Why am I kind of focusing an entire build around this ability? So when we look at these other warrior abilities, what do you see? Big, long, massive cast time and all that. Magma Barrier has no cast time. Magma Barrier gets it casted, boom. There it is. And you might notice a lot in this video that I'm always doing this. I'm always just Magma Barrier, Magma Barrier, Magma Barrier. So Magma Barrier is quite strong. Enemies in this game do not track you. And if you go back and you watch that little 3-minute introduction, it's probably too long, but I think it's really helpful to understand the whole thing, right? If you go back and you look at it, you can Magma Barrier dodge roll, Magma Barrier, well, not right there, Magma Barrier dodge roll, Magma Barrier dodge roll, okay? The reason I dodge roll so much is multiple things, okay? One, enemies do not really track. Some enemies will track you, but for the primary, like 99% of enemies, when they start their attacks, they don't move during the attack. Like if they start here, you have to be in front of them to take damage. They're not gonna turn left or right in the middle of their attack. In most ARPGs, enemies will just track you perfectly. Their character will just follow you as long as you're in melee. In this game, dodge rolling basically ignores most damage enemies deal by getting you either out of the range of their melee attack or just getting to the other side of their melee attack, not being in the path of a projectile anymore. There's lots of purple orbs and chaos damage around that'll always be following you. you do not want to stand still if you're in melee range. The more ranged builds where you stay away from enemies and you're trying to AoE them, these ones can be more mobile because they're very far away from people. Me, I'm really close to people. And when I'm really close to people, I'm gonna die really quickly. As tanky as I am, I'll die pretty quickly. So we want to always be dodge rolling. Now the second important part about dodge roll, and you'll see me do this a lot, every ability in the game has a recoil. It gets pretty bad. So one of the problems here is when we look at these abilities, right, they have a recoil. But the thing is, the damage comes out pretty early in the ability. So you can dodge roll, which breaks all enemies trying to attack you, and it stops this weird recoil. Even on Bone Shatter, which I do have high attack speed on, if you look at Bone Shatter, I have a cooldown on it. I should probably take that off for this showing right here, and I'll get into that in a second. I just want to kind of set up right here. If you look at Bone Shatter, look at the amount of time I'm spending like recovering. Or I can just do that. Do you see that? That's why I dodge roll all the time, because basically the developers in this game have coded it so melee characters need to dodge roll every single attack to break the extremely shitty recoil that they have on all their animations. Okay, so why do I have my runes? Why do I have my runes? My supports? Why do I have them set up the way I do? So originally we were doing Bone Shatter with Armor Breaker. They recently bug fixed Armor Breaker, and it doesn't really work the way I wanted it to anymore. Bone Shatter is still a pretty good ability, and I never rolled fourth links. You might be surprised I got this far without fourth links. I just never got them. I just never did. People ask why I don't buy them. Well, if they don't roll for me, well, I guess I just won't get them. I'll get them when I get them, right? I'm not really struggling here, so I'm not going to spend Exalted getting a fourth link. Whatever, it's fine. We're level 91 and we don't have fourth links. It's fine. It's whatever. So, because we don't have fourth links, we're primarily relying on a lot of different abilities. So, why are we just giving Magma Barrier a lot of damage in AoE? Because Magma Barrier does a lot of damage and a lot of AoE. Okay, so let's start from the top, and maybe this will help explain everything. First off, Mace Strike. Mace Strike, this is, I mean, I use it a lot, you know, but it's not really that important of ability, but I do use it a lot. We got Brutality. It does more physical damage and no other multipliers. Close Combat, so it does more damage to enemies that are close to me. Heft, so it has more maximum physical damage. Martial Tempo, so it attacks quicker. And Immolate, so when enemies are ignited, it does more damage. Now the Immolate, I'm not entirely sold on. I've gone between that and the bonus Stun. I think I might be leaning more towards the bonus Stun, because it's kind of hard to keep some bosses immolated, ignited, and so I think the bonus Stun is overall better for the most part. Now remember, your stun is based on how much damage you deal, so if I'm dealing 30% more damage, that's almost as good as 50% more stun just for generating stun, right? So the more damage you deal, the more you're going to stun. If I'm using my left click primarily just to try to beat down bosses between abilities, then realistically speaking, you know, I go back and forth on this one, but I think for the most part, Immolate, it really depends. It's hard for me sometimes to keep them ignited because I have no support for igniting. I'm completely relying on RNG right here. Shield Charge. Why do we have Shield Charge the way they do? They cause more stun buildup, they do more damage with momentum, and Stomping Ground, well, Stomping Ground got buffed recently. You can actually see this right here. The strength damage went from 20 to 30 to 80 to 120, so that's a pretty good one. So that's not Stomping Ground. Stomping Ground right now, you can see this, these little shockwaves here do pretty good damage, and generally speaking, when I hit into an enemy pack, they'll all die. So Shield Slam becomes a pretty good way to reposition. The other thing I don't like about Shield Slam is it got this long cast time in the middle, then you have to run up. You do block forwards, so do pay attention to that. You do block as you're running forward, so it's safer than other gap closers for this class. It's the safest gap closer in this class, in fact. Because it literally holds your shield forward while you're going. You can't be hit forward. It's pretty safe, that one. So I just have it set up that if I want to engage into a pack of enemies, I ensure that they're stunned so that they don't turn around and kill me, right? But for the most part, they should be dead already. The stun isn't so required because if you actually look at it, Shield Slam on the collision already has a 50% more stun modifier. So yeah, not only does 5,000 damage on use, so significantly less on Magma Barrier, riddle that one, right? But, yeah, I mean, between the 50% stun and the 50% stun here, it will generally stun everybody. If you don't stun it, that's fine, though. They'll at least get a hit stun for a little bit. So, Maze Strike, we just kind of have set up to hit people. You can see I don't use it too often. Shield Charge, once again, we have it set up that when we charge in, we kill people, or at the very least stun them. Once again, I don't use it too often. Hammer the Gods. Now, this one has some synergy with some other things I'll do, which I'll get into. We have this set up for it is less attack speed but way more damage. It's ancestrally boosted, so it gets another huge damage and AoE modifier, and then it has less skill effect duration. Now the skill effect duration you can change, but I like it because a lot of enemies will walk out of range. Some enemies, some rare mobs particularly, just don't like standing still, so I get the less effect duration, so it comes down a bit quicker. Generally speaking, it's going to one-shot most rares I hit anyway, with proper setup, so it's not that big a deal. If it doesn't one-shot them, I'd rather it hit on average than not. Okay. Infernal Cry. Why is Infernal Cry working for me so much? Well, the one thing you might want to remember with Magma Barrier, which I did go into real quick here, Magma Barrier gives you a endurance charge every single time you block. So if you block, then you block, then you block, you might notice you're going to be sitting here at 3 endurance charges. I wanted to do something with them, so I went Infernal Cry. Some people don't think it's worth even giving, even caring about endurance charges. Some people think they're so underpowered in Path of Exile 3 you shouldn't even care. I think like it's a resource, I've got it, it's free. I looked around, I kind of spitballed which, so originally I was going Seismic Cry, and I don't really like Seismic Cry overall, although both Seismic Cry and Infernal Cry have huge drawbacks. I found overall Seismic Cry wasn't really helping me kill bosses, because at the end of the day, a lot of these endgame bosses have so much stun resist that it didn't really help me that much. Infernal Cry, on the other hand, once you get some quality in it, you can see here that Infernal Cry is getting a lot of damage. Bosses, unique enemies, have already 20 power, so you're looking at 140% damage modifier on Infernal Cry. I know in my last video I kind of talked bad about Infernal Cry, but now I'm thinking Infernal Cry is better simply because at the end of the day, I think that Seismic Cry requiring an enemy to be stunned is just, it's ending up kind of being too much of a setup is the right way to put it. There's lots of bosses you can block, attack, block, attack, block, attack, and oh wait, there's a full Infernal Cry, buffing your next 4 abilities, boom, boom. Now, the Combust is still worthless. I think at this point, it literally doesn't even, it might as well just not do damage anymore. It does absolutely nothing. I don't know why it's so bad, it just is. Mostly Infernal Cry is just here, you run into a pack of enemies, you Infernal Cry, then your Magma Barrier does so much damage it destroys everything, but mostly I use it on rares and bosses to kill them. So, you know, if you hit a boss, you get that 20 power. If you try to hit rares, what you'll do if you try to hit rares, you run into a pack. Generally speaking, you like go into the pack enemies, boom, drop the hammer, you're good to go. Okay, that'll kill pretty much everything if you use it properly. Now, Magma Barrier, we've pretty much gone over. I should go real quick over Infernal Cry. I mean, oh boy, do I do Shield Wall? Shield Wall, let's talk about Shield Wall, but first let's talk about Infernal Cry. Infernal Cry, we have skills empowered, deal 15% more damage, so they deal 140%, then 50% more. This can start actually doing a lot of damage. Then I have it set up for dazing enemies. I'll be real, I'm not too sold on keeping this one. It was much better on Seismic Cry. For Infernal Cry, I'm not so sure. And then I have Inspiration just to reduce its mana cost, because as we start reaching the higher levels, these mana costs start going insane. I have absolutely no room in my build for any sort of mana mitigation, mana management, mana anything. So we're just shoving less cost in it, and we're looking away. We're not gonna pay attention to it. We cannot afford to manage our mana. Magma Barrier, well, shoot. Okay, we're gonna go for Shield Wall. Shield Wall is really dumb, and I would recommend you just don't even care that much about it. Why am I even using Shield Wall? For Font of Blood, Font of Rage, and the skill duration. That's literally it. During bosses, you put it behind you as you hit the boss. It gives you a little bit of healing. It gives you a little bit of rage. That's literally it. If you don't use it, it doesn't really change anything. In fact, a lot of times I don't think it's even worth using, To be honest, I think the fact that it has such a long cast time basically kills it. If that attack time went down, it would maybe be too good at spamming AoEs, but it doesn't even do that much AoE damage anyway, to be fair. I think they could safely take that attack time down to 1.0 and just make it a bit quicker to set up, and then you just could use Fawn of Blood, Fawn of Rage, and that would be totally fine. But, and anyway, that's just what I'm using it for. It's just there. It's not that important. Okay, so let's move on then to Magma Barrier. Okay, let's talk about a few things about Magma Barrier that are really, really important for me to go over. So the entire ability does fire damage. You can see that it's entirely fire damage. That's really good. We have Elemental Focus because that's elemental damage. The problem, obviously, is this doesn't let it ignite, which can be a serious issue. Because we were trying to use Immolate here. Now, we can use Infernal Cry and buff other abilities with fire damage, and I can often light people on fire, but let's just say the synergy isn't really here right now, so this is why I'm kind of thinking Immolate's not going to work, but it does make the Magma Barrier do a lot of damage. We have more AoE effect, and we have that on Magma Barrier because it starts reaching across the entire screen, which I will get into. Once we start looking at this, I'll explain why that's happening. But it'll make sense in a second here. And then lastly, we have they get extra damage as fire damage because that's just another damage boost. It's just damage boosting, we're just boosting damage. Okay, so Magma Barrier works pretty good. Now let's talk about the mechanics of Magma Barrier. Magma Barrier, if you time it out, it goes on a 0.75 second cooldown. If you don't time it out, it doesn't go on cooldown. That means if you are much better than me, you can actually block, and completely eradicate everyone. It also means if you're fighting a boss with quick attacks, you can, in fact, and quite easily and quickly, you can attack, block, and blocking does cancel the recoil animation on your attack. So you can attack, block, you see that? So you can get very quick attacks in and blocks. This does a crap load of damage, builds a lot of endurance charges. You will very quickly, if a boss is actually hitting you, you will very quickly stun them if they actually are getting blocked. Now you're gonna have to learn which bosses are blockable and which attacks are blockable. But at the end of the day, if you do learn that, yeah, the bosses that attack you, you'll just shred through them. It's really funny. Overwhelming Presence. Why? Enemies get reduced stun threshold. This helps you stun them a lot. Now you might notice pretty much everything I'm using is quality on it, and that is gonna get important. As I pass Magma Barrier, before I forget, probably the most important thing to quality in this entire build is Magma Barrier, because the duration goes from 0.5 to 0.7 on the parry. That raises it from you have to learn all their attacks and parry it properly to you can generally, not 100%, but you can generally chuck it in their direction. You can generally chuck it in their direction and you'll get a parry off it. So if you only have limited resources and you can only quality one thing, I would heavily recommend Magma Barrier. Okay. Overwhelming Presence, we also have qualityed. This just reduces enemies' stun threshold, so you can stun them way easier. Reduces their element threshold, so it lets you ignite them, or, well, I mean, it lets you ignite them easier. But we're still figuring out the ignite part of this. Now, for Overwhelming Presence, of course, we have Vitality, Cannibalism. If you're running Warrior without Vitality and Cannibalism, at the very least, without Cannibalism, you're inting yourself to death. You're actually just killing yourself for no reason. Cannibalism is, I would say, there's not a single Warrior build out there that can be run without Cannibalism. Sure, you can. Sure, you could still probably do fine. But, like, at the end of the day, if you're not running Cannibalism, you're probably AoEing enemies from so far away that you're not even really a warrior anyway. At that point, you're just playing a glorified mage. Lastly, then, of course, I went Herbalism, so the life flasks heal us more. You notice a pattern? We want healing, 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 because we need to keep ourselves topped off so we don't get burst to death. Okay, that brings us to Sunder. Why am I going Sunder? That's because despite buffing it in this very patch, they still did not fix Rolling Slam. That's right, Rolling Slam does two attacks, the first slam and the second slam. The second slam, if you aftershock on the second slam, it does no damage. The aftershock for the second slam still does no damage. They buffed the ability and never logged in to actually test it, which is amazing. So they did change it to where the first strike now gets 50% more stun buildup, which, sure, cool. really the buff they did for it was almost so insignificant. I wonder why they even wasted their time doing it. A lot of people have been saying I'm too negative, but like, come on. Like, what is happening here, man? Like, this ability takes so long. It's got 1.5 seconds total attack time. Now, compare that for a second here. Even Sunder has 1.4 seconds total attack time. Sunder takes less time than Rolling Slam. Sunder, which obliterates half the Northern Hemisphere, has less cast time than Rolling Slam. Developers, please. Rolling Slam would actually work so perfectly in this build, but it's just not usable and it's so frustrating. At any rate, we have Sunder. What do we have here? Upheaval, Lightning Infusion, and Rage Forge. So Sunder is how we use all this rage. Now you might be noticing, wait, but you don't use rage. Yes, I do, because I cheated. I'll go over that in a second once we go over the passive tree. So we have Upheaval on it, so it creates 2 additional fissures, takes a little bit more cast time. Now, the funny thing is about the reduced attack speed, a lot of people keep saying that that's inting and that's why it takes so long. Because it has a total attack time increase, the entirety of Upheaval only gives it a 0.26 second cast time increase. At the end of the day, it's worth it, because if you look without Upheaval, 24 DPS, look at this one, 14 DPS. Since you hit 3 fissures and you run up into enemies and hit them in melee, and because every single fissure can also do a shockwave, generally speaking, this is just absolutely insane. This is just probably the best way to get this. I'll sell that item to him later. You know what? You guys are only... Oh, okay. You know what? That guy wants that for 30. Shoot. You know what? I'm going to edit this out here real quick. Yeah, Sunder is just really good, and you'll notice that basically what happens is I use Sunder as my long-range nuke, especially if I can find myself trapped or backed into a corner. What I'll do is I'll cast Sunder while in a corner like this, so I can't be totally surrounded and beat down, and this just clears out large paths of enemies. It's really effective at that, especially with this setup. If you spam it too much, you might get surrounded, and it certainly has a long cast time. I've been knocked out of it a lot, so I would generally recommend using this more often as your AoE. You're way more mobile, less hard, less able to be killed. But this one right here, this one right here is just really effective at, yeah. So this is our get out of jail free card AoE. This brings us to Bone Shatter. Now, what have I done with Bone Shatter? I've turned Bone Shatter into a obliteration device. So the first thing we have here is we do more damage as cold damage. It's not that great, but like we're getting an additional like 15% damage on it, so it's fine. I couldn't really think of anything better. Then we have, it has 50% more area of effect, but gets a plus 6 second cooldown. Now that cooldown does screw us pretty hard, pretty often, okay? But we have this Impact Shockwave, which was recently buffed to have 2 meters range. It was 1.4, now it's 2 meters. This means if I hit someone with this Bone Shatter, and it does its damage, and it aftershocks again, it obliterates them. It just absolutely annihilates them. This is really good. Now it is on a 6 second cooldown, and you can cancel it really easy as shown there, but at the end of the day, it is really, if you're hitting enemies and you're not getting kills on them, it's really good at just being like, okay, screw it, and just boom, and you just wipe out that entire area. The 6 second cooldown is hard to work with, but there's only so many increased area of effect runes in the game, so like, you gotta work with what you got. I got the area effect here, I got the area effect here. If I could, I'd put magnified effort on like practically everything, but I only got the one of it. Okay, this brings us to Resonating Shield. As you've probably noticed, Resonating Shield activates Magma Barrier, because it is technically your shield. Instead of using Ray's Shield, we completely replace it with Resonating Shield. Now, Resonating Shield is not a good ability. It's still really bad. I would consider it practically not even worth using. But it does do a lot of things for us. One, it replaces Ray's Shield. It's just better than Ray's Shield, so screw it, why not use it, right? Two, it does allow us to get some armor shreds in. So we're getting armor shreds into a build that would otherwise not have armor shred, armor break. So that can help us a little bit to increase our damage. That's just generally good. The other thing is we put mobility, rage, and demolisher on it. So that means we're getting armor shred, and compared to Ray's shield, we actually take 30% less movement penalty. So we can move not like really fast, but like I would say at the very least for holding a shield, we're moving at like a decent pace here. So when you're walking into enemies and you do that, you can still continue to move and not punish yourself that much. The rage is kind of useful. It just gives us free rage. I mean, the ability is pretty worthless, so I thought, screw it, I'll just give it rage, right? And then last we have Demolisher to just help it break more armor. Once again, it's qualityed. So far as quality, as I reach the end of this, the most important things to quality are probably Magma Barrier. Bone Shredder, I would say, is extremely important to quality, but because I've put it on a 6-second cooldown, it's not that big. The quality for Bone Shredder increases its attack speed, which, as you see, makes it come out much quicker, allows us to recover from it much better. So you can see, that just makes it way more usable. The quality, of course, for Overwhelming Presence dramatically, because we're going from 24 reduced stun threshold to 29%. So that's a pretty good reduction, so we can just stun enemies way easier. Everything else, Infernal Cry is decent with damage. Shield Wall, I don't even have quality because literally who cares. Hammer of Gods reduces its cooldown. I didn't even do Shield Charge. Serious question for any developer watching this. If you made its quality effect cooldown recovery, but you didn't want to give it a lot of cooldown recovery, because like you didn't want people spamming it for mobility, maybe just make it something else. If its effect from quality is going to be so bad because you didn't want it to have cooldown recovery at a very high value, why not just make it literally anything else? End statement. Okay, so that brings us to our passive tree. Okay. If you want to look at my passive tree, here's my setup. Why is my setup this way? I keep making this joke, but it's not really a joke. It's more a reality. Once you reach the late game, enemies basically stop gaining more HP. You don't really need that much damage. It's kind of like a balance issue. I guess it makes AoEers feel more happy, but at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how much can you AoE. That's literally it. Area of effect. How much can you area of effect? So it is easier to count how many area of effect nodes I did not take because I have taken everything else. No, I'm not even joking. Let's count the amount of area of effect nodes I have not taken. I haven't taken these 3. I haven't taken these 2. I haven't taken these 3. And I haven't taken these 2. No, I'm not joking. That's literally it. That's literally every area of effect node I have not taken. Yeah. So we focus early on by getting some damage with two-handeds by just going here. We focus more on by getting even more damage down here. Between this and this, we basically have all the damage for the rest of the game. Now we do have this mace node. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think if I was truly min-maxing, I would probably take this node out entirely and put it into the fire node maybe. But someone smarter than me can come up with something. I'm kind of keeping my build flexible because they are kind of doing balance patches and I don't want to like go too heavy into the Magma Barrier. Like I don't want like an only Magma Barrier build and then like, you know, 20 seconds later, like, oops, Magma Barrier got nerfed to the ground. And I'm like, ah. So do remember Magma Barrier doesn't have attack speed. So Crushing Verdict is extremely good for it. And do remember, Magma Barrier counts as an attack, persistent, AoE, melee, fire damaging ability. So it shouldn't, although it might, I mean, I don't know how the coding in this game works. It shouldn't count as a two-handed weapon attack, but it should count as an attack. And it should also count as a fire attack. Do you get it? Okay. Now, whether or not it counts as a one-handed or not, I really don't know. Do shields count as a one-handed weapon? This build might end up working better as a one-handed build, but I haven't actually tried if shields count as a one-handed attack. Someone should probably get back to me on that one. At either rate, after getting AoE nodes, after getting a good setup on base damage, what else do we have? What have you noticed? Well, you've probably noticed I've taken pretty much every defensive node as well. Over here, we have Projectile Bulwark. Arrows cannot hurt me. Screw arrows. Over here, we have Towering Shield. Some of you probably noticed, why am I not block capped? Well, technically I am. Whenever I do an active block, I get 25% more block, which with my current setup would be 10% on average more block, raising me to 75%. Yes, really. Recently, meaning 4 seconds. This means so long as I active block once every 4 seconds, I am actually at the block cap of 75%. For those of you writing little comments right now being like, aha, he's not a block cap, what a fool. Well, no, you're the fool. Over here, of course, we have 2% increased attack damage per 75 armor rating on the shield. I'm gonna be real with you, I don't think this was really worth going. This seems to be dramatically underpowered to the point of insanity. I don't really know what the developers were thinking with this one, but okay. I have one of the highest armor shields on the entire server. And this is still like how much is this? It's like 24% damage. I don't think the math is mathing on this one. But I just took it because it has increased attack damage, increased attack speed. To be honest, I could probably change this to a different node. The increased attack speed was nice to offset some of my attack speed penalties. But again, if I was min-maxing, I'm not sure I would go with this one again. There's probably 4 nodes we could do better. Other than that, we got heavy armor. This gives us way more armor. We got made to last. This means we heal some of that physical damage we take, helping us top off. We've got heat proof. 25% of our armor applies to fire damage. That's pretty good. Of course, over here, we have blade catcher. So if I get crit, no, I didn't. And over here, if we just get a lot of stun threshold from armor, and that stun threshold can be really, really, really good to, well, not getting stunned. Okay, I also went down through here to get the Defender's Resolve. I pathed through here. This pathing could maybe be worked on as well. I haven't quite figured out. Someone's probably going to come out with a much better build than me in like 20 seconds, but there you go. We also went with Resolute Technique because, well, I'm not getting accuracy in this build. I'm stretched to the limit. Key points here are, of course, to dual wield. We went with the Brute Strength node. That gives us a lot of strength. We went right here through the Beef node to reach up here. Our pathing has been kind of jank. Now, as for jewels, you might be remembering I said, what did I do to get rage? Well, you might be noticing I don't have any rage nodes. So how am I so often at full rage? Well, because of my jewels. So every developer does bad balance. Every developer doesn't quite do some things and they have some oversights. These developers don't seem to have balanced their jewels very well. A lot of jewels have some modifiers that are just as good as a skill point, which is kind of weird to me. Some things you can get on jewels aren't really that good, and some of them are just as good as a skill point. So why do I not have much block in this build? Because I just went and got my block, a lot of it on jewels. So over here, I have a node. This is probably the weakest node I have right here. I'm gonna probably replace it here soon. But we have 7% increased block chance, 3 rage when hit by an enemy, 8% increased knockback distance, and 5% increased magnitude. Okay, that's whatever. We don't really care about that one. Down here, we have 9% increased damage with maces, 10% increased area of effect, 1 rage when I hit someone with a melee attack, and 3 rage when I get hit by an enemy. So between these two, every time I get hit by an enemy, I get 6 rage. Why didn't I go more into a rage build? Currently, there is an issue with rage, and if you are watching this video and this issue is no longer in the game, congratulations, you've solved the issue and maybe you should go into a rage build. But as of right now, if you are hit by an enemy and you block it, you do not gain rage, which is insanity level stupid. The second problem is rage seems to be rate limited. Only warriors seem to get rate limited. Every other class can stack 9,000 effects per second, but by God, if warriors could get more than 1 proc of rage per second, that would be crazy. The amount of times you can get rage from being hit seems to be very, very limited for some reason. I don't know the exact numbers, but at the very least, off my observance, it seems to be like you can only get rage like every like half second or every 1 second, somewhere around there by being hit. Even if you're getting 14 rage from being hit, you'll be surrounded by like 5 people and you'll take like a full 1.5 seconds to generate the rage, despite them all sitting on you. But at any rate, with this one and this one, we generally throughout the course of a fight sit at full rage. Yeah. Then we've got one last jewel over here. We get increased armor, maximum fire resistance, increased block chance, and increased stun buildup with maces. This one's pretty good. I could maybe do it a little bit differently, but the stun buildup with maces is fine. It's doing fine, right? And so I got 3 jewels. We got AoE on this one. We've got increased fire damage, all that good stuff on this one. And on this one, I'm probably going to replace this one. But you see, this is where we're getting all our rage from here. This is how we sit at rage. And then with the shield wall, which is literally a wall, with that one giving us font of rage, that's a good damage multiplier, 30%, that I can pretty frequently keep stacked up. That's something the range classes can't do. It's probably the only thing they can't do. They'll probably find a way to steal it anyway because they're bastards. But yeah, I think... Yeah, Rage is supposed to only stack on melee hit. But then... Yeah, it's only supposed to stack on melee hit, but I swear these ranged bastards will somehow find a way to steal that too. At any rate, that's a build. A lot of AoE effects, good bit of base damage right here. A lot more AoE effects, and then a lot of tankiness. We still get pretty good sunders with this build, very good sunders. The hammers of gods hit really hard too. And of course, once you get an enemy set up for a stun, even bosses, because of how Bone Shatter works, we get some pretty good damage out of this one. I also get some good clearing. So that's going to be about the build. That's what you're doing with it. If you think anything you can do better, then you probably can do something better. I'm not saying this is the best build. I'm just saying I've cleared the game with this build. So there you go. That's his build. I hope you all enjoyed listening along. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And if you have any comments or you want something else for me to discuss or go over, or if you just think this video is too long, leave a comment about that too. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.